library. And they went in there.
All right, Shalom. Shalom. Let's start off by giving all praises, honor, and glorification to our power, Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rucha Kodash. Let's give double honors to the apostles, the bishops, and the elders of Great Millstone, whom Yahweh Bahasham Yahushai set up to guide the election of the nation of Israel. And of course, Shalom to the elect, starting with the 144,000, and the great multitude that believe in the words of Yahweh Bahasham Yahushai. This is the brother Zakar from the Great Millstone Montreal branch. And I was just watching the apostles on location at Columbia University, which is on Daily Motion. Okay, and Apostle Gabar was just going into the fact that the universities have played a major influence on corrupting the minds of the people. Okay, then instantly what came into my mind was how a lot of these, which eventually Apostle Recha brought it out. This is nothing new. Okay, we have entered into other men's doctrine, but what came into my mind was that that a lot of these world leaders, they send or actually have studied in the United States of America. Okay, and which the indoctrination that they received, they brought it back to their own country, and of course perverted the minds of their people by way of these indoctrinations that they received in Babylon. Okay, so this is the book of Jeremiah 51:7. It says, Babylon hath been a golden cup in the Lord Yahweh Bahasham Yahushai's hand, that made all the earth drunken. The nations have drunken of her wine, therefore the nations are mad. Okay, and her wine is her philosophies or ideologies, okay, which they use the universities to push their ideologies, their philosophies, okay, their beliefs, their customs, okay. That's a major way where they indoctrinate the people, okay, they pervert the minds of the people, okay. That's why it says the nations are drunken of her wine, therefore the nations are mad. Okay, so that's one of the ways that people are being indoctrinated by way of these universities. Okay, and when it says the nations are mad, they've become crazy, man. Okay, by way of these universities. Okay, so I went on the AI. Okay, and I asked it, how many heads of states or countries have studied in the USA? It says current heads of states and government educated in the USA. It says as of late 2025, 66 current world leaders, heads of state or government, including presidents, prime ministers, monarchs, and equivalents, have received higher education, undergraduate or postgraduate, in the United States. Okay, this figure comes from the Higher Education Policy Institute's annual Soft Power Index, which tracks leaders educated abroad and highlights the U.S.'s significant soft power influence to education. Harvard University leads among U.S. institutions with 15 of these leaders as alumni. Okay, so you have a lot of these leaders that went to Harvard. Okay, so it says as of 2005, 66 world leaders have studied in the United States. Okay, so we see how major of an influence that those American universities has upon the world. Okay, which proves Jeremiah 51:7. Okay. It says here, key insights, geographic spread. These leaders represent about 28% of the world's 195 countries, with strong representation from Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Examples include Emmanuel Macron, President of France, attended Harvard Kennedy School. Ferdinand Marcos Jr., President of the Philippines, studied at the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania. Lee Hsien Loong, Prime Minister of Singapore, Masters from Harvard's Kennedy School. Jovenel Moïse, former President of Haiti, but illustrating the trend. And he was assassinated. Okay, he was assassinated a couple years ago. Okay, apparently, he didn't want to play ball with Babylon anymore, man. So guess what? He got deleted. Okay, it says studied at Quisqueya University, U.S. affiliated programs. Okay, says fields of study. Common areas include public policy. You see, economics, law, and business. For instance, 14 current leaders hold U.S. business degrees per Empower data. Okay, so they're indoctrinated on public policies, economics, law, and business. But according, what is the frame of reference? Well, the Edomites are frame of reference. The Edomite mindset. Okay, the Babylonian mindset. Okay. Okay, so they get a doctrine according to what according to the U.S. Standards. Okay, historical context: nearly 300 current and former leaders have studied in the U.S. overall, per U.S. Department of State records, underscoring long-term trends. For a full list of current leaders, refer to. Okay, says this educational pipeline continues to shape global alliances with U.S. universities like Harvard, Stanford, and Georgetown, frequently cited as destinations for future leaders. Okay. Okay. So you have a lot of these foreigners, these you can say these elite foreigners. Okay, rich, wealthy men. They send for their children to the U.S. To be indoctrinated, so they can come back and have positions of power. In their own country, okay, because they have that U.S. degree, okay, they're indoctrinated with the ways of America, but ultimately it makes them crazier, okay, because they bring back the mindset of America, which is the Edomite mindset, okay, that wicked mindset. They bring it back to their own country, which ultimately leads to the perversion of their own people, because it says in the book of Sirach chapter 10 and verse 2, as the judge of the people is himself, so are his officers. And what manner of man the ruler of the city is, such are all they that dwell therein. Okay, so if the ruler is corrupted, okay, he's wicked, well, his people are gonna follow the same steps, man. Okay, because he's their example. Okay, I know a lot of these world leaders, man. They've been indoctrinated with folly. Okay, the doctrines of Esau, which they learn at these universities. Okay, so I asked here, did this allow these leaders to build partnerships and unions with the USA? It says, yes, studying in the United States has consistently been shown to create long-term personal networks, institutional ties, and immeasurable pro-American orientation among foreign leaders. While it is not a guarantee of permanent alliance, the evidence from decades of data is strong. Okay, so that also helped the Babylon, the USA, to have a stronghold on the world. Okay, having these different foreign leaders having studied in America, it allowed strong alliances. Okay, partnerships. It says key evidence that U.S. education builds partnerships, statistical correlation with pro-U.S. policies. A 2003 study by the Chicago Council on Global Affairs and Texas National Security Review found that leaders who studied in the U.S. are 35 to 40% more likely to sign free trade agreements with the United States. Okay, it'll facilitate America to have control on this country, and ultimately, the United States to have puppet leaders in these different countries, man. Okay. Even if, let's say, well, or they'll have somebody in there that'll have the president's ear, but he also works for the United States. Okay, it says 35 to 30% more likely to support U.S. positions in the UN General Assembly, significantly more likely to allow U.S. military basing or overflight rights. Okay, so they'll allow America to set up their military base, man. Okay, you see, that's an example of the U.S. dominating that country. How you allow another nation to have their own their own military in your country, okay, that's a sign that country has dominated you, okay, has power over you, okay, all right. But this is all part of the plans of these elites, okay, and that's why they allow a lot of these future world leaders to study in these American universities, okay. It says similar findings appear in research from the Quarterly Journal of Political Science and International Organization. Personal networks and alumni diplomacy. Many leaders openly credit their U.S. classmates and professors for ongoing relationships. Emmanuel Macron of France says regularly meets Harvard Kennedy School classmates in Washington and New York. Several became informal back channels during the AUKUS submarine crisis. Lee Hsing Long, Singapore maintains direct contacts from his Harvard days that helped negotiate the U.S.-Singapore Free Trade Agreement and subsequent defense pacts. Van Duke, former president of Colombia, his Georgetown network was instrumental in securing continued U.S. counter-narcotics and security aid. The Harvard Mafia in Latin America, presidents of Mexico, Peru, Colombia, Chile, at various points, coordinated regional policy on multiple occasions. All right, so it says institutional examples of lasting cooperation. Georgia, both Presidents Salome Zurabichvili, Colombia, SIPA, and several prime ministers educated at Georgetown, Washington, Tufts, etc., repeatedly cite U.S. education as a reason for Georgia's strong NATO aspiration and hosting of U.S. training missions. Liberia, so these connections that they've made, studying in the USA has allowed, strong alliances, and agreements, okay? It says, and partnerships. Liberia, President Joseph Boakai, University of Delaware, and former President Ellen Johnson, Sirleaf, Harvard, both oriented the country firmly toward the U.S. after the Civil War. Okay. Jordan, King Abdullah, Georgetown, Oxford, but did his military training at Fort Knox and speaks warmly of his U.S. contacts, has kept Jordan as one of the steadiest U.S. allies in the Middle East. So that's all set up, man. Okay, it's all set up for to strengthen America, and for it to have a stronghold in the world. Okay, it says soft power rankings. The annual Portland BCG USC Soft Power 30 and Brand Finance Global Soft Power Index consistently rank education as the single biggest contributor to U.S. soft power, largely because of this leader pipeline. In 2025, the U.S. still educated 28% of sitting world leaders, 66 out of 195 countries, far ahead of the UK. UK is 58. Excuse me. France is 40. Okay, percent. But see, these are Edomite countries, man. Okay. But we see that America has had the greatest influence. Okay, and one of the major ways was by way of their universities, having these world leaders study in their universities. It says, in the aggregate, the U.S. education is one of the strongest predictors of future cooperation with the United States. It creates personal friendships, institutional memory, and the shared intellectual framework that often translates into concrete partnerships decades later. The 66 current leaders who study in the U.S. represent a very significant and still growing pro-American network at the highest level of global power. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why a lot of these countries are gonna cry when America is destroyed, because America is gonna be destroyed by way of nuclear fire. Okay. and the fact that they've made alliances and partnerships with America, okay, and they've become rich because of these alliances, they're gonna mourn at the destruction of America, okay. This is Revelation 18 and verse 8. Therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she shall be utterly burned with fire, nuclear fire, and the fire of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai from his celestial vehicles. It says, for strong is the Lord Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai, who judges, or judges who? America, Babylon the Great, okay, the whore, okay, as she is known in the scriptures. Verse 9, and the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her. There you go, okay? The kings of the earth, man. Okay, these leaders, okay, which have made alliances with her, have taken on her ideologies, her philosophies, okay? They've made partnerships with her. They've united themselves with her, okay? Okay? And live deliciously with her. They've become rich with her, shall bewail her and lament for her when they shall see the smoke of her burning, standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, alas, alas, that great city Babylon, America, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. Because America is going to be destroyed in 1 hour, okay, when our Lord Yahweh Shai comes, you know, with his mighty angels, okay, to destroy this place and to deliver the elect of the nation of Israel, because only the elect are going to be delivered out of America. Anybody else in America is going to die, okay. Verse 11, and the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buy their merchandise anymore. America is known as the #1 consuming nation, okay.